All right, thank you very much for all of your introductory presentations. So today we're really talking about scaling up and really trying to understand your on-the-ground experience and how to do that. And so all of you just showed us some really wonderful, all the work that your companies have been doing. And so I would like to start with kind of a bigger picture thing. And so I would say, other than the money, and we know that funding is a big hindrance to being able to do the work that we're all trying to do. So assume you had unlimited funds. What are the most significant roadblocks to scaling up both DAC and mineralization? And I should start off by saying I would hope to foster a discussion. Please respond to each other, talk to each other, and I'll try to rein everything in. So thank you.
So I think, most of us that kind of got interested in this wanted to go into the field and start something and, see what happened and do some experiments. But maybe what we didn't know we were getting into was like how much of our energy and how much of our time goes into dealing with, for example, permitting of things that hasn't been done before, helping out with advocating for new legislation, and kind of going through our processes and explaining how it all works on these levels. So for me, I think if that could be solved, I would be a very happy person. Because in addition to us kind of having to figure out how to do all of these things, we are constantly kind of put into some existing boxes that do not fit. And that, for example, leads to us putting a lot of energy into either trying to get away with not doing something, like, for example, in the case of carbon mineralization, seismic surveys, they do not help us to monitor our process. But in some cases, it's required. So either we put money into doing something that doesn't show us anything, or we put a lot of energy into justifying why we shouldn't do it. So being put into a box that doesn't fit is a bit frustrating at times. And also it leads to us having to add an extra layer, because then we need to use our own monitoring technologies, for example. So in addition to having to take all the boxes that do not fit, we need to build the box that actually fits and do both. So for me, if this would be a little bit smoother process, I would be a very happy person.
Yeah. I'd like to double down on that. I think the amount of novelty and innovation that we're facing in our direct work is hard to see from the outside, because we're not only developing new technologies, we're developing an entire new market and industry. There is no product for direct air capture that is established out there, right? We had to design a product and create a market for it. And I think the same for mineralization. There's no supply chain for what we do. There are no standards and norms. In fact, even the voluntary carbon market was not ready for CO2 removal products when we started, and Carbfix and Climeworks together had to develop a first methodology against which the standards can then validate and verify our projects. And it turns out that this standard in the end was an important feed into the process of the EU reworking their CCS directive to finally integrate mineralization. So you see there's a group of a few tens of people here in Iceland and in Switzerland designing something that then the EU Commission uses, an organization that represents 450 million people, to redraft regulation. So there's no regulation, there's no insurance products for what we do. And you see, I could go on and on. But let me end with saying that this is stressful and challenging, but it's also a big part of the fun in our everyday work, right?
Are there other industries that are further along in their own sectors that you can learn from, whether or not it's geothermal here in Iceland, so that had to kind of break through in the same way that mineralization is trying to break through now, or that you've looked toward in your own companies? Or is it just figuring it out?
I mean, if you, I can try to answer this or address this question. So, if you work with the subsurface, there is a lot of subsurface knowledge. There has been, for the last 100 years, technology developed to characterize the subsurface. There has been technology developed to transport fluid gases, inject fluids, in the subsurface. This was all developed by the oil and gas industry, by geothermal industry. So these are very established industries. But as Sandra and Daniel said, we are very nascent, no? So we are very young. We are not an established industry. So the challenges here is we are different, no? We can apply certain things from, this 100 years of experience from the oil and gas and a little bit less from, the geothermal industry, but it's different, no? So that difference has to be communicated. Yesterday was a very good presentation. We have to communicate that to policymakers. We have to make sure that they understand, what these differences are. Mm-hmm. We have to talk to the regulators and, we basically have to adapt regulations or come up with new ones, which takes a lot of time. We have to then also address the public. And basically, there was yesterday also a panel on, we have to inform the public. The public has to understand what we are doing and, what the consequences are, for, social as well as environmental consequences. So this is the big challenge. It is fun, yes, I agree with Daniel. It's very fun, to talk. In addition, to the technological development, which is even more fun. I mean, from my perspective, but these are the big, challenges, yes.
And just to maybe add on the public part of things, I think this is also a big challenge, especially for a science-driven company with a lot of nerdy people that want to measure everything down to ppb. And then you have the climate crisis, which is, in a sense, not easy to explain in layman's terms. And then you are, in addition to that, kind of gonna, explain to them that you can take the gas and you can turn it into stone, which just, it sounds weird. And then, you're going to tell them that it's not going to do any damage and that this is actually a brilliant idea. But you have to leave out all of your technical words, which, that can be a little bit of a challenge for some of us at times. So making it accessible for the public to kind of, evaluate on their terms what we are doing, that has also been a bigger part of my job description than I thought to begin with.
Yeah. Okay. Before I move on, any other thoughts about unlimited funds?
I don't know if this is the perfect analogy, but at least in the Western world, and certainly in the United States, the development of the solar industry is an interesting one to look at, right? It was once seen as also sort of science fiction, like what the hell do you mean you're putting these panels on my roof and it's gonna somehow feed into the grid? And the pricing for that was quite expensive until it was less expensive. Now solar deployment has its own challenges, but I do think that everything from offtake agreements to renewable energy credits to certain policy designs that we've seen there are worth looking at or replicating. The difference is here, and to underscore this, and this is probably a frustration shared by the whole room, I previously used to work at Uber. I led policy at a division of Uber, and Uber is a very frustrating company. A lot of people hate it, but the product ships into the marketplace, and then you hire policy people to convince lawmakers, hey, why don't you slow down this regulation? Why don't you add this new regulation to the benefit of a product that already exists? Here, as Daniel thoughtfully laid out, we have to convince lawmakers, community members, scientists to come join the company and everyone in between that A, the product should exist, but B, we have to create the marketplace at the same time. So you're asking lawmakers and regulators to take a bet on a vision for a product they haven't really touched and felt into the marketplace. And I think that that's sort of a different dynamic here where you have to induce an entire formation of something from the front end before you really have proofs of concept, which actually make your facilities and your field projects super, super important, including ours in California, because you need to, I think, midwife interactions between community groups, environmental groups, and lawmakers to show them that this is real, they can touch it, they can feel it, and then animate that interest to create the marketplace.
So this is actually a good segue to the next question that I'd like to ask. And that's, do DAC and mineralization sectors inherently rely on government subsidies? And if they do now, will they always into the future?
There's one point here. I think government, to say that it relies on government subsidies, somehow the framing of the question makes it feel like we have a tin can out and we're constantly looking for money. I think which might be true, but like at its core, it is very easy for, and I am not an elected official, but it is very easy for elected officials to vote and commit to a net zero plan. Right? It is much harder for them to operationalize how are they going to do the emissions reductions and how are they going to do the removals. And so to date, as Daniel pointed out, when you all helped create the first methodologies for the first product of a carbon removal, that service is basically no different than a trash removal service, which is a public utility. Whereas right now, that trash removal service is funded almost exclusively on the banks of venture capital, and kudos on raising rounds of cash, but venture capital or a select group of buyers, right? And we love that select group of buyers. We've benefited from Stripe and Frontier and Microsoft and others. But to really get to gigaton scale, a couple of tech companies and a couple of venture capitalists are not going to solve our planet's challenge. And so I think what we need is, instead of just saying government subsidies, we need the government to create two new customer categories. We've got the voluntary buying markets, that's great. But we need the government, which is a heavy emitter in and of itself, with its military, with buildings of its own, fleets of vehicles. We need them to purchase carbon removals. I think yesterday we heard about how the United States is experimenting with direct procurement, so it makes the government a customer. And then separately, we need to do what the European Union is looking at now, what some colleagues of mine in this room have been trying to do in California, which is to say, hey, among a certain specified set of industries, how do we make sure that those industries are also purchasing removals? And when you have a mix of customer categories pushing more capital into the market, then you can bend on the cost curve. All of our companies will bend down the cost curve with our own capital efficiencies from project site to project site. We will do that. That is our responsibility. But it is also a global responsibility to add more capital in, not so we can have more government subsidies, but so that way we actually have powder deployed to address this issue at scale.
I'd like to add that I think we do need subsidies in today's framework where we indeed do not have a market framework that enforces climate protection.
Sure.
And I guess we've all heard this in our economies education. At some point, climate change is a perfect market failure. It's a negative externality, and the market will not solve this challenge for us. It is policy that has to come in and provide a regulatory framework that forces the markets to price carbon emissions and to add a value to carbon removals. And as long as we don't have that, of course we need subsidies. Who else would pay it? You can rely on a few pioneers that can drive it for so and so long together with subsidies, but eventually we need laws in place that force humankind to protect the climate.
But it's an important point, no? So it is the policies that have to be in place.
Yeah.
And the policies will then enable a market, to be established and to grow. But in longer terms, mid to longer terms, it can't be on subsidies. It's very important to realize that yes, we need these policies in place that then build the market, and the market will then take care of it, no? And then buy subsidies, no? So we can't rely on that in the very long term.
I think I just want to underscore that point, because what Juerg is saying is exactly right. A lot of us get to celebrate globally, but certainly within the United States, what the Biden administration did with the IRA and the infrastructure law. We are beneficiaries of that money. We'll take more subsidies, but eventually that money is going to get drawn down, and our Congress is not going to do jack shit about it, plussing that money up with more subsidies anytime soon. So what happens then is that, unless, to Juerg's point, you create the policy-oriented market signal, then those subsidies might wax and wane or be only developed on the backs of the political appetite in that moment. So you really need to use the initial subsidy to get companies up and running, and then quickly pass the laws that he's mentioning to then spur the market.
Yeah, I think it's more than subsidies. We have to just realize the magnitude of the problem that we are facing, and that has to be reflected on governmental level as well, not just with subsidies, but with just a transformation in how we are approaching things. And it has to do with legislation. It has to do with how we are going to solve this problem and where we are going to find the money to do it. But that has to happen on a much bigger scale than just through subsidies.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like to move into something a little bit different, and this may be something that Daniel, you may have some particular insight in. So compared to your successful projects in Iceland, what does the DAC industry, or what does Climeworks in particular, need to be aware of when deploying in a more traditional oil and gas region, where they've traditionally done conventional storage into saline reservoirs?
Well, one aspect Vikrum already mentioned in his introduction is the communication. In a society that has been living off extracting fossil fuels from the ground for generations, where this industry has provided jobs, well-paying jobs for generations, you must not present yourself as an enemy to that industry that now cleans up the mess that they have caused, and really that's also not how we see it. So the communication has to be adapted. It has to be an interplay, and this interplay is also very important. As you said, Juerg, we need the knowledge and the experience of the oil and gas industry in dealing with the underground, in extracting things from the underground, injecting things in the underground, characterizing the deep subsurface. We need that know-how, and it's actually a perfect synergy with CO2 capture and storage.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we have of course this big workforce that is trained to do all of these things that we need to do, but I think we also need a commitment from the oil and gas industry to move away from the fossil fuels. So for this to work out, I mean, it can benefit the scene greatly to have all this know-how, but it can also kill, what we are doing, because we can lose the trust if we are relying on something that is not convincing. So if we are relying on partners that do not have a decarbonation strategy, we are just, pouring in one place and out in another. So this has to go hand in hand. The commitment has to be there. But of course, if we unlock this potential, we could be in a very good shape in terms of the implementation of these technologies.
Trust is a very, very, very good word, no? And Daniel, you mentioned that in areas that the population is aware for many decades of oil and gas production, no? And it's very interesting, what we experience, and we work in an area that is heavily, obviously, with oil and gas, no? And the people, in terms of CO2, storage, and compared to conventional storage to mineralization, they are accepting conventional CO2 storage. That's something, they trust, especially the state oil and gas companies. And then we come in, with a different solution, mineralization. And they're very skeptical, and suddenly, they raise questions that are actually also related, to conventional storage, but because they don't know, what mineralization is, and they think, that there is all, this adverse effects, in that. So it is very interesting to see, this public dynamic, depending on, what the history is of, the local population. So it can be completely unexpected. We would say, if we go out and say, look, CO2 is mineralized, it's limestone, that everybody is, yeah, that's perfect, no? That's the environmentally benign storage. It's not always the case. So we have these challenges, no? And the challenges go back to educating, the public. and the policymakers.
I think that this is, it was certainly the reason I was rambling so much, actually Daniel was mentioning last night that when you get policy people on stage with real scientists, the policy people talk too much. So when I was rambling earlier, just very correct, so when I was rambling earlier about California and Louisiana, in a US context, the reason I mention it is exactly this interplay. You know, in 2023, we announced a set of principles as a company about how we would partner with renewable providers, with labor unions, the wages we would pay, community benefits we would offer. And part of that was an overview about our commitments around oil and gas, that we would not accept money from fossil fuel producing industries, and we would not accept board seats from a corporate governance perspective if there were any acquisition or takeover attempts. I do want to say that I think what was just illustrated here is that we were very humbled when we had announced 2 new facilities in Louisiana, and we have a team that lives in Louisiana that engages in the community, but I've spent a good chunk of time down there myself, where you quickly learn that this is not necessarily about UN climate science or about new technologies. It's also just about a way of life and culture. And while we commit to those commitments that we made and stand by them, it's also very important, I think, to underscore what Daniel laid out, which is you cannot go into a community and necessarily assail the very pathway that they took to get into the middle class. At the same time, we can't be filling up one part of the tank and pouring it out, as Sandra thoughtfully laid out. And this is where I think communications and the subtlety and the nuances is very key, because we need to talk to both audiences, but I think the worst kept secret in climate for any of us that have external roles is that we need to talk out of both sides of our mouths in a way, depending on the audience that we're talking to. You know, we got support from a governor in that state who is very aligned with Donald Trump. And the reason we got support financially was because of the job story that we were able to create. Both Climeworks and Heirloom are bringing a lot of jobs to that region. But when we talk to anyone in bluer states where we want more climate policy, as we mentioned, that will help with the cost curve, we need to appeal to the path to net zero is not happening fast enough. We need more climate action, et cetera. And so I think that this delicate balance can be struck on the workforce side. Borrowing from deep expertise has been laid out. But I think that we all need to be both principled yet careful for how we exude these things into the world. Because the first thing I get when I go into meetings in Louisiana now is like, oh, you're the company that made that stance on oil and gas. Why should we trust you? But at the same time, we're trying to earn their trust to build these things at scale. So I'm not saying that we should back away from principles, but I do think we need to be hyper mindful of what we're saying, how we're saying it, and when we're saying it, if we're going to get more participants and coalition members on board to really invest in the scale-up of our specific industries.
If I was staring you down at the podium, it was because I think it was a really important discussion to have amongst the whole group here. So
Fair enough. I'm very
so
caffeinated, so I'm talking very
to discuss it here. Okay, anything anyone else wanted to add on that particular topic?
I mean, of course, from the ground, but also, you know, from the more high-level aspect, because we have been through, you know, the rise of CCS projects, and then the kind of failed public communication, which was partly because people rightly claimed that CCS was an excuse to, you know, for business as usual in terms of oil and gas extraction. So we also have to learn from that, and we don't want to head towards that path again. So it's a complicated issue, but I mean, yeah, we need to learn from the past in terms of this if we want CCS and CDR to become a thing.
In a somewhat related question, did you want to?
Just one addition to what Juerg said about mineralization being alien to the oil and gas industry and to people who are used to these processes, and then them seeing all sorts of issues. We have a different perspective when we talk to our potential customers about the product we're selling, about the removal service we're selling, where mineralization makes the story much easier to tell. You can say that the CO2 gets injected, and within 2 years, it's effectively turned into stone. A few hundred meters down in tiny rock pores, that's a convincing story, right? Whereas when you're storing in sedimentary basin, injecting pure CO2, which is the part that the oil and gas industry has experience with, that we have done for a few decades, that's more difficult to explain because there that CO2 will stay around for a few hundred years, a few thousand years. So when there's clearly a difference when talking to lay people, where mineralization makes the story much easier, and talking to experts in the geological
It's actually very
field.
similar to the last question I had, so I'm hoping I can get your perspective on it too. But so I want to better understand how the mineralization projects on the ground. How's the public acceptance of it been? You know, is it different than what you've seen with conventional storage projects? Are people more open to it with, say, discussing permanence and just the different type of approach? Well,
in general, I think yes. I think mineralization has enjoyed quite high public acceptance. That being said, of course, projects carbon storage in general faces, the same set of skepticism wherever you do it, regardless of if it's conventional or mineralization. But people do like the permanency and being able to, like Þorgerður from Landvernd explained yesterday, to actually see the drill course and see what it looks like and see these minerals, in the pores. They're not going anywhere. I think, of course, this is a very helpful and powerful tool for us to gain public acceptance. Although it's of course a challenging subject in general.
Yeah. It's interesting, and I would say, it really depends where you are. It's regional, it's country specific. And so the approach, to the public approach we have, or the approach towards the public we have to take, is not one recipe. It is multiple recipes. No? So in certain countries, maybe the perception of mineralization is completely different, towards more the conventional CO2 storage. And you said, I would totally agree. For more than 20 years, I work on mineralization. I always use these arguments and think, if you can demonstrate that it's locked into stone, no, that's it. No, nothing can happen. But there are others. Lay people will come and say, "Hey, you will build mountains." No? And it's a volume question, it's a mass question. So this question is not a stupid question. No? So that's where education comes in. No? And in terms of permanence, yes, we use that as a selling, of the mineralization. But if we are honest, or if I would challenge that permanence argument, is for more than 40 years, we inject, conventional CO2 storage is happening. CO2 is injected, in conventional sedimentary reservoirs, and there is actually almost zero evidence of any reversal of that storage. So when I speak to regulators, they call that permanent. Mm-hmm. So, you have conventional storage, it's permanent, no? So what do you say, yours is more permanent? Mm-hmm. Because you mineralize? Yes, it would be more permanent, no? But it doesn't really matter in terms, if you talk to a regulator, because I cannot point out the case, in conventional storage where we had a reversal of that storage. So it really, there are nuances in that are important.
So we have about 2.5 minutes left, and I just wanted to have a lightning round question here. And so that's, what are you most excited about in this space in the next 5 to 10 years? Particularly from a technology standpoint, or anything, frankly, whatever excites you. Who wants to jump in?
I'll start quickly. I'm excited about what Europe is doing. I think there's a lot of fascinating things that'll come out of Brussels, informed by a lot of people in this room. But maybe I'll just react to what Juerg said. I think the biggest opportunity and challenge we have is that each of the facilities will react to the communities differently, and there's a lot of learnings to be had. We have spent a lot of time with the environmental community in one of our facilities in the United States, and we've brought them along, and they've really transformed their thinking about DAC and CDR from one that was just a fig leaf for more fossil fuel production to one that understands it's part of the energy mix. I'm excited for all of us to be a part of that journey and really be ambassadors for why this is important social change, and to sort of bring everyone along. You know, once upon a time, no one believed in solar, and now we are where we are, so I'm excited to see that for the DAC and CDR community.
Yeah. First, I just want to emphasize in terms of conventional storage, because I have the mic. Of course, we cannot downplay conventional storage because we need that as well. That is very important. So challenges in terms of the different approaches, that's another story. But both of them need to be addressed as a safe option for storing CO2, just so that is said here. But in terms of technical development, I mean, I'm already living the dream. I'm just, you know, driving through the Mammoth plant and seeing this happen in real time, and you know, watching the projects being scaled up. It's just so fascinating. But I'm also really excited to see what happens now when more people join the field and we have more brains to work. How can we make this more efficiently? You know, the technical advances that make it even a better process. It's a very exciting scene to watch.
Yeah, so briefly, you know, looking at what Grishma this morning showed, you know, the CO2 emission or, you know, the CO2 concentration curve in the atmosphere and where we have to be in 2050, there, you know, you see the opportunity in front of us. We see, you know, that's our objective, that's our goal, and that's what excites me, you know, are all these opportunities we have, you know, and we can innovate, you know, so the innovation power, you know, the combined innovation power in this room is just fantastic, no? So let's tackle this, you know, together, and that's, you know, what excites me for, you know, the next decades to come, no? Yeah. So that's where the opportunity lies, no?
Okay.
I think I can't find better words for ending this.
Okay.
Let's leave it there.
That works. All right. Well, thank you, all of you. I really appreciate this conversation. And, yeah.